It was a normal Monday morning at Atlanta's Hartsfield-Jackson International Airport, the busiest airport in the world. Travelers hurried through the terminals, dragging suitcases, sipping coffee, checking departure boards. Amid the blur of motion, one woman walked calmly through the concourse, her posture straight, her gaze steady. She wore a plain black coat, a navy blue duffel slung over her shoulder, and a badge clipped to her chest. But within minutes, airport security flagged her as suspicious. Her name was Danielle Parker, a 38-year-old black woman, soft-spoken, professional, and, unbeknownst to most of the people staring at her that morning, a highly decorated FBI counterterrorism analyst. She had worked on cases involving international threats, cyber warfare, and national security operations. But today, she wasn't behind a desk or in a briefing room. She was on her way to Washington, D.C. for an urgent meeting at FBI headquarters, one she'd been asked to attend on short notice. As she approached the security checkpoint, she placed her bag on the conveyor belt and stepped through the metal detector. The machine beeped softly. A Transportation Security Administration officer looked up, motioned her to step aside, and asked her to remove her jacket and belt. Danielle complied without hesitation. She was used to the procedure. She'd traveled dozens of times before. But this time felt different. Two officers whispered quietly as she stood waiting. One of them, a younger man in his early 20s, kept glancing at her ID, then at her face. "This doesn't look right," he muttered. Another officer, an older woman with a skeptical expression, nodded toward a supervisor. Within minutes, the supervisor walked over, his tone curt and cautious. "Ma'am," he said, "we're going to need you to come with us for additional screening." Danielle blinked, surprised. "Is there a problem with my identification?" she asked calmly. The supervisor frowned. "We're verifying your credentials. It'll just take a few minutes." Danielle handed over her government-issued badge, a legitimate FBI credential with holographic security markings, serial number, and signature. The supervisor examined it but didn't seem convinced. "Where did you get this badge?" he asked. Danielle's stomach tightened. "From the bureau," she replied, keeping her voice composed. "I'm with the Counterterrorism Division." The officer exchanged glances with his team. One of them picked up a phone and stepped aside. "Yeah, we've got a situation," he murmured into the receiver. "Possible fraudulent federal credentials. She's claiming FBI." Within seconds, a quiet alarm was triggered in the security room. Danielle could feel the eyes around her, other passengers watching, whispering, recording. A black woman being questioned by security in an airport. A familiar story in an unfamiliar way. The minutes dragged on. Danielle stood still, her hands folded in front of her. She'd been trained for high-stress situations, but this wasn't a terrorist threat or a field op. This was humiliation, right in front of hundreds of strangers. When the officer returned, his tone was firm but defensive. "We've contacted the FBI field office in Atlanta. They're sending agents to verify your identity." Danielle's pulse quickened. She could already imagine the conversation. Her colleagues, the same people she'd worked alongside for years, were now being called to confirm whether she was real. And so she waited. Around her, airport life continued as if nothing had happened. Children ran past with candy wrappers, flight attendants hurried by, a janitor mopped the tiles beside her. But inside, she felt a familiar ache, one she thought she'd outgrown long ago. The ache of being doubted, profiled, reduced to a stereotype. 20 minutes later, two men in dark suits walked briskly through the checkpoint. They flashed their badges, FBI Atlanta Field Office. The TSA supervisor stepped forward eagerly. "Thank you for coming," he said. "We believe we've detained a suspect presenting false FBI credentials." The senior FBI agent, a tall man with gray hair, turned his gaze toward Danielle. His expression changed instantly, from suspicion to shock, then to quiet recognition. "Agent Parker," he said. Danielle nodded. "Good morning, sir." The room fell silent. The TSA officers froze. Passengers turned their heads. The senior agent stepped forward, extended his hand, and then, in a gesture that stunned everyone, he gave her a brief salute. "It's an honor to see you again," he said. "We've read your reports from the Yemen case. Excellent work." The younger agent beside him added softly, "She's one of the top analysts in the bureau." A long, heavy silence followed. The TSA supervisor's face turned pale. He stammered, "Ma'am, I didn't realize." Danielle took a slow breath. "You didn't ask," she said simply. The senior agent turned to the TSA staff. "Her credentials are authentic. She's cleared for travel. I suggest you apologize to her. For a moment, no one moved. Then the supervisor nodded awkwardly. Our apologies, Agent Parker. Just doing our job. Danielle forced a polite smile, picked up her bag, and walked away. But the moment stayed with her. As she moved toward her gate, she thought about what had just happened, not as an FBI employee, but as a black woman in America. Even with a badge that symbolized trust, she had been treated with suspicion. Her qualifications, her years of service, her integrity, all invisible under the color of her skin. Later that evening, as she sat on the plane to Washington, she opened her laptop to review her briefing notes. But her mind kept drifting back to that security line, to the looks, the whispers, the disbelief. She wasn't angry, not entirely. She was disappointed. She remembered joining the Bureau 15 years earlier, one of only a handful of black women in her training class. She'd believed in justice, in fairness, in the power of the truth. She'd worked hard, earned respect, and climbed through the ranks. But moments like this reminded her that no title, no clearance level, could fully shield her from bias. When she landed in Washington, the story didn't end. News of the incident spread quietly through FBI circles. A few days later, an internal memo was issued, not naming her, but addressing increased concerns over credential verification and public perception. It was bureaucratic language, careful and distant. But behind the words, everyone knew what it was really about. And then something unexpected happened. One morning, as Danielle walked into her division's conference room, she found a small envelope on her desk. Inside was a note written by the deputy director of the FBI himself. It read, "Agent Parker, your professionalism under pressure speaks louder than any incident ever could. Thank you for representing the Bureau with dignity." Attached to the note was a small gold pin, the Bureau's internal commendation for integrity. For the first time since that airport encounter, Danielle smiled. But the story didn't end there. Weeks later, footage from a bystander's cell phone surfaced online. The short clip, less than a minute long, showed part of the confrontation, Danielle standing calm and composed, surrounded by officers, then the moment when the FBI agents walked in and saluted her. The video went viral. Within 48 hours, it had millions of views on social media. People around the world shared it with captions like, "Respect earned." Others called it a lesson in humility. News outlets reached out for interviews, but Danielle declined them all. She didn't want fame. She wanted awareness. In a quiet statement issued through the FBI's press office, she wrote, "Greater than, I don't blame individuals for doing their jobs. But I do hope we learn to recognize that suspicion often wears the wrong face. Trust should be earned through truth, not judged through appearance." Her words resonated far beyond law enforcement circles. Civil rights groups, educators, and even TSA officials discussed the story in meetings and workshops. The agency quietly updated its training modules on implicit bias and credential verification procedures. It became a case study, how unconscious prejudice, combined with procedural rigidity, could lead to public embarrassment and institutional damage. For Danielle, though, the lesson was personal. A few months later, during a diversity and inclusion panel at FBI headquarters, she spoke publicly for the first time. Her tone was calm, her message simple. "Greater than, every day, we talk about protecting America," she said. But protection doesn't just mean fighting external threats. It also means protecting each other, from assumptions, from fear, from prejudice. Because if we lose that, we lose the very thing we're sworn to defend. The audience rose in quiet applause. In that moment, the woman who had once been treated like a suspect stood as a symbol of respect and resilience. And yet, she remained humble. To her, it wasn't about proving anyone wrong. It was about proving that grace under pressure could be stronger than anger, that professionalism could silence ignorance more powerfully than confrontation ever could. Months later, the TSA supervisor who had detained her requested a meeting. He arrived at the FBI office in plain clothes, visibly nervous. When he met Danielle, he extended his hand and said, "I wanted to apologize to you in person. That day at the airport, I made assumptions. I've been rethinking a lot since then." Danielle shook his hand. "We all learn," she said softly. "That's what matters." The man nodded, eyes downcast. "You handled it better than I did." She smiled. Experience teaches patience. After he left, she sat quietly at her desk, reflecting on how small moments could ripple outward, how one misunderstanding could lead to awareness, and awareness could lead to change. Her colleagues began to treat her story like a reminder, not just about professionalism, but about perception. That the line between security and suspicion is sometimes drawn by bias, not evidence. And yet, Danielle never became bitter. She continued her work, traveling, analyzing, and briefing senior officials. But something inside her had shifted. She began mentoring younger agents, especially women and minorities, teaching them how to stay strong in a system that sometimes doubted them. One of her mentees, a young analyst named Maya, once asked her, "Agent Parker, how did you stay so calm that day?" Danielle paused before answering. "Because I knew who I was," she said. "And I knew the truth would walk through that door eventually." That single line, "the truth would walk through that door," became her quiet mantra. In time, Danielle's story was featured in a bureau training video, not as a scandal, but as a study in composure and respect. Her image, standing tall as FBI agents saluted her, became a symbol of what integrity looks like under pressure. Years later, when she finally retired from the bureau, her colleagues presented her with a framed photo from that very moment, the salute at the airport checkpoint. Beneath it, a plaque read, "Greater than, respect is not given by a badge, it's earned by character." She placed it on her living room wall, beside her degrees and commendations. But whenever visitors asked about it, she simply smiled and said, "That's just a reminder that sometimes, being underestimated is the beginning of being understood." And so, the story of Danielle Parker, the woman who turned suspicion into respect, continues to be told in classrooms, training halls, and across social media. Because in the end, it wasn't about an airport or a misunderstanding. It was about perception, about how easily we forget that heroes don't always look the way we expect them to. It was about courage, the quiet kind that doesn't shout, but stands tall, even when the world looks away. And it was about the truth, the kind that doesn't need defending, because it eventually walks through the door, salutes you, and reminds everyone who you truly are.